The train glided smoothly through the dense forests of Vermont, its polished exterior reflecting the fading golden hues of the late afternoon sun. Inside, the opulent carriages of the Elysian Express radiated timeless elegance, mahogany paneling, vintage sconces casting warm light, and plush seats upholstered in deep burgundy. The train was a sanctuary for the elite, a haven where luxury met nostalgia. Among the passengers was a man in his early 40s, Henry Davenport. His tailored navy suit and silver cufflinks suggested wealth, but it was the haunted look in his gray eyes that drew attention. He sat alone in his first-class suite, staring at a photograph held between trembling fingers, a woman with a radiant smile, her dark curls framing a face brimming with life. The knock on his suite door startled him. He slid the photo into his pocket and composed himself before calling out, "Come in." The door opened, revealing a young woman dressed in the classic uniform of the train's attendants, a crisp white blouse, a tailored black vest, and a knee-length pencil skirt. Her name tag read, Rebecca Mills. She looked no older than 30, with auburn hair neatly pinned back and kind brown eyes that exuded professionalism. "Good evening, sir. I'm here to check if there's anything you need," Rebecca said with a polite smile. But Henry didn't respond right away. His breath hitched, and he froze, staring at her as though he'd seen a ghost. His eyes, filled with disbelief, darted across her face, her high cheekbones, her soft smile, the way she stood with a grace that felt both poised and familiar. "Elise," he whispered, the name escaping his lips like a plea. Rebecca frowned slightly, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "I'm sorry, sir. Did you say something?" He shook his head, his voice unsteady. "Forgive me." "You remind me of someone I knew." Rebecca's smile faltered, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to confusion. She could feel his piercing gaze as if it were searching for answers in her very soul. After an awkward pause, she stepped forward slightly, her tone warm but cautious. "I believe you have me mistaken for someone else, sir. My name is Rebecca Mills. I'm here to assist you during your journey," she said, extending her hand as a gesture of courtesy. Henry hesitated before taking her hand, his touch gentle, almost reverent. For a moment neither spoke. Then, as though overcome by an invisible force, Henry lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, that she instinctively pulled her hand back, her cheeks flushing. "Sir, I think you might have me confused with someone else," she stammered. Henry didn't respond immediately. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he murmured under his breath, "It's her. It's her voice, her face, even her scent." Rebecca, thoroughly unsettled now, straightened her posture and clasped her hands in front of her. "Sir, if there's nothing else you require, I should return to my duties." But Henry's next words stopped her in her tracks. "When does your shift end?" She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Excuse me? I'd like to meet you in the lounge car later this evening, just to talk," he said, his tone urgent yet soft. "Please?" Rebecca hesitated, glancing at the ornate clock mounted on the wall. "Mr. Davenport," she began, her voice measured, "I appreciate your invitation, but it wouldn't be appropriate. The train has strict policies about staff fraternizing with passengers." His expression darkened, disappointment flashing across his face. "I understand," he said quietly, his shoulders slumping slightly. Rebecca offered a polite bow of her head. "If there's anything else I can assist you with during your journey, please don't hesitate to call." With that, she turned and exited the suite, closing the door softly behind her. The moment she was gone, Henry sank into his chair, his head in his hands. The room, once filled with the subtle hum of the train's movement, now felt oppressively silent. Henry reached for the intercom panel by the desk and pressed the button for guest services. A crisp, professional voice responded on the other end. "Good evening. This is guest services. How may I assist you?" "I need to speak to someone about arranging a private meeting with one of your staff members," Henry said, his tone firm. The voice on the line hesitated. "Sir, I'm afraid staff are not available for private engagements with passengers. It's against our policy." Henry's grip tightened around the receiver. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice low and commanding. "That young woman, Rebecca Mills, is the living image of my late wife. I'm not asking for a frivolous favor. Name your price, whatever it takes to make this happen." The silence on the line stretched for an uncomfortable moment before the voice returned, more guarded now. "I'll need to speak with my supervisor. Please hold." As the line went silent, Henry leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. His heart ached with a familiar pain he had thought buried long ago. The universe had placed Rebecca in his path for a reason, he was certain of it. The faint hum of the train's wheels against the tracks seemed to echo his thoughts, a relentless rhythmic reminder that time was slipping away. Later that evening, as the train sped through the darkened hills of upstate New York, the Elysian Express exuded an air of quiet sophistication. The soft clinking of glasses and subdued chatter filled the lounge car, where travelers enjoyed champagne and the melodic strains of a piano player in the corner. Henry sat alone at a table near the window, his gaze fixed on the inky expanse outside. In front of him, an untouched glass of whiskey reflected the soft golden light. His mind churned relentlessly, replaying every detail of his brief encounter with Rebecca. The uncanny resemblance, the tone of her voice, even the way she carried herself. It was all too much to dismiss as coincidence. He was jarred from his thoughts by the approach of the maitre d', a middle-aged man with a carefully groomed mustache and an impeccable black tuxedo. "Mr. Davenport," the maitre d' began with a slight bow, "I understand you've made a rather unique request concerning one of our attendants." Henry met the man's gaze, his expression unwavering. "Yes, I did, and I trust you've found a way to accommodate it." The maitre d' cleared his throat delicately. Ordinarily, such requests would be out of the question. However, given your, compelling insistence and your reputation as a patron of distinction, we have made an exception. He glanced over his shoulder before continuing. "Miss Mills has been informed of your request. She will join you briefly in the lounge, but only under the condition that it does not interfere with her duties." Relief flooded Henry's face, though he masked it quickly. "That will suffice. Thank you." The maitre d' inclined his head and withdrew, leaving Henry alone once more. Moments later, the soft click of approaching heels announced Rebecca's arrival. She hesitated near the entrance of the lounge car, scanning the room before her eyes landed on Henry. With a measured breath, she walked toward his table, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Davenport," she greeted him with professional composure, though her voice betrayed a hint of unease. "I was told you wished to speak with me." Henry rose from his seat, gesturing towards the empty chair across from him. "Please, Rebecca, sit down." She hesitated for a moment before taking the offered seat, her back straight and her expression carefully neutral. "I'll admit, this is unusual," she began, her tone polite but guarded. "What exactly did you want to discuss?" Henry studied her face intently, as if memorizing every detail. "I don't mean to alarm you, but you bear an extraordinary resemblance to someone very dear to me," he said slowly. "My late wife, Elise." Rebecca's brows knit together in confusion. "I see," she said cautiously. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm afraid I don't know how that involves me." "I don't believe in coincidences," Henry continued, his voice low and deliberate. "The way you look, the way you speak, it's as if she's come back to life." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm sorry if my appearance brought back painful memories, but I can assure you I'm just an ordinary person. My life is far removed from anything extraordinary." Henry leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Rebecca, where are you from? Your family, your parents, where did they come from?" The question took her by surprise. She blinked, her composure slipping slightly. "Why does that matter?" "Please," Henry pressed, his voice softening. "I need to know." Rebecca hesitated, the vulnerability in his eyes giving her pause. Finally she answered, "I don't know much about my family. I grew up in foster care. The record said I was born in a small town in Pennsylvania, but beyond that, there's nothing. No names, no history, just me." Henry exhaled sharply, as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. "No parents, no family," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. "I've made peace with it," she said firmly. "Whatever my past was, it doesn't define who I am now." Henry sat back, his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle didn't align, yet there was an undeniable pull, a connection he couldn't explain. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "I didn't mean to pry, it's just seeing you tonight brought back memories I thought I'd buried." Rebecca offered a polite nod, her professionalism reasserting itself. "I understand, Mr. Davenport. Grief has a way of surfacing unexpectedly." But Henry wasn't ready to let her go, not yet. "Do you have any photos of yourself as a child?" he asked suddenly. "Anything that might offer a clue about your past?" She frowned, taken aback by the question. "Number A, as I said, there's very little information about my early life. Why does it matter?" Henry hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "Because I need to know if it's possible, if there's even a chance, that you're connected to Elise in some way." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly, her tone turning cautious. "I don't understand. Are you suggesting we're related?" "I don't know," Henry admitted, "but the resemblance, it's too striking to ignore." The tension between them was palpable, the air heavy with unanswered questions. Rebecca glanced toward the piano player, who had begun a hauntingly beautiful melody, the notes filling the silence that stretched between them. "I think this conversation has gone far enough," she said finally, rising from her seat. "I'm sorry if my presence caused you distress. But I'm not your wife, Mr. Davenport. I'm just a woman trying to do her job." Henry stood as well, his expression pleading. "Rebecca, please. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just asking for a chance to understand." She paused, her eyes searching his face. For a moment she seemed to waver, caught between the instinct to walk away and the unspoken curiosity his words had stirred. Finally she shook her head. "Good night, Mr. Davenport." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Henry standing alone in the dimly lit lounge. The soft strains of the piano followed her as she disappeared into the corridor, her silhouette swallowed by the shadows. Henry sank back into his chair, his chest tightening with a familiar ache. The photograph in his pocket felt heavier than ever, a silent reminder of the past he couldn't escape and the mystery he couldn't ignore. The hours crawled by as the Elysian Express raced through the darkness, its rhythmic motion punctuated by the occasional whistle that echoed into the vast night. Henry remained in the lounge long after the other passengers had retired, the once bustling car now eerily quiet. He nursed his whiskey, though the burn of the alcohol did little to dull the storm raging in his mind. He replayed Rebecca's words over and over. No family, foster care, nothing to explain the connection. And yet the resemblance to Elise was undeniable. It wasn't just her face, it was her essence. The way she carried herself, the subtle grace in her movements, even the warmth in her voice, it was impossible to ignore. Henry's hand drifted to his pocket, pulling out the photograph once again. He studied Elise's face, running his thumb along the edges of the worn picture. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The faint creak of the lounge car door pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up, expecting to see a staff member come to usher him back to his suite. Instead, Rebecca stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I couldn't stop thinking about what you said." Henry set the photograph on the table, his eyes fixed on her as she approached. "Rebecca," he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "No," she interrupted, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "Let me speak. I don't know why you're so convinced there's some connection between us, but there's something about this that doesn't feel entirely wrong. I don't understand it, but I can't ignore it either." Henry leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Thank you for coming back," he said sincerely. "I know this isn't easy." Rebecca glanced at the photograph lying between them. Tentatively, she reached for it, her fingers brushing against the edges of the paper. When her eyes landed on Elise's face, a sharp intake of breath escaped her lips. She looks exactly like me," Rebecca murmured, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and unease. "It's like staring at my own reflection." Henry nodded, his gaze unwavering. "You see it now, don't you? It's not just a passing resemblance, it's her." Rebecca shook her head, her brow furrowed. "But that doesn't make sense. You said she passed away years ago. I've never even been to the places you mentioned. How could this be possible?" Henry hesitated, the weight of his emotions rendering him momentarily speechless. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with vulnerability. "I don't know, but what I do know is that Elise and I had a bond that transcended explanation. She was everything to me. Losing her, it was like losing a piece of my soul." Rebecca's expression softened, the pain in Henry's voice cutting through her defenses. "I'm sorry for what you've been through," she said gently, "but I don't understand what you want from me. If you're hoping I can give you some kind of closure, I don't think I'm the person who can do that." Henry took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't need closure," he said. "I just need to know the truth. Whether or not you're connected to Elise, whether this resemblance is fate or chance, I need to understand why you're here on this train in my life." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy blanket. "I told you everything I know," she said quietly. "I don't have a family. I don't have a past that ties me to anyone." Henry hesitated, then asked, "Do you have a birthmark? A small one, right here?" He gestured to the base of his neck, just above the collarbone. Rebecca frowned, clearly puzzled by the question. "Why does that matter?" "Please," Henry implored, his voice soft but insistent, "just humor me." After a moment's hesitation, Rebecca reached up and brushed aside the collar of her blouse, revealing the faint outline of a small crescent-shaped mark just above her clavicle. Henry's breath caught in his throat. "It's the same," he murmured, his eyes wide. "Elise had that exact mark. In the same place." Rebecca quickly adjusted her collar, her expression a mixture of discomfort and confusion. "That doesn't mean anything," she said firmly. "Lots of people have birthmarks." Henry shook his head. "Not like this. Not identical." Rebecca's voice grew sharper, tinged with frustration. "Mr. Davenport, I'm not your wife. I'm not Elise. I don't know what you're hoping to find, but I can't give it to you." Henry's shoulders slumped, the intensity of the moment draining the energy from him. "You're right," he admitted. "I'm sorry. I've overwhelmed you with my grief and my questions. I didn't know what else to do." Rebecca regarded him for a long moment, her expression softening once more. "I don't think you're crazy," she said finally. "But I do think you're searching for something that might not be there." Henry nodded slowly, though his heart remained unconvinced. "Perhaps." Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirt as she prepared to leave. "I should go. It's late." As she turned to walk away, Henry called after her, his voice tinged with desperation. "Rebecca." She paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "If you ever feel like there's more to your story than what you know," he said carefully, "promise me you'll come to me, even if it's years from now." Rebecca hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Good night, Mr. Davenport," and with that, she disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving Henry alone in the lounge. The photograph lay on the table, a silent witness to the unresolved questions that lingered between them. Rebecca hesitated for a moment before touching the spot just below her collarbone, unconsciously drawing attention to the faint crescent-shaped mark she had carried all her life. "Yes, I have it," she said softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Henry froze. His chest tightened as the realization sank in. This wasn't mere coincidence. This mark, the resemblance, the inexplicable connection he felt, it all pointed to a truth he could no longer ignore. Swallowing hard, he looked into her eyes, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't think it's just a resemblance, Rebecca. I believe Elise was your twin sister," Henry said, the words tumbling out in a rush. He stood, his emotions overwhelming him, and pulled her into a warm embrace. "We'll figure this out together. I promise." Rebecca remained still in his arms, the weight of his words settling over her. Tears welled up in her eyes as the possibility of a family she never knew began to feel achingly real. The next day, the Elysian Express made its first grand stop in the enchanting town of Santa Rosa, California. Known for its picturesque streets, artisanal shops, and the lavender fields that stretched to the horizon, it was the perfect place for a pause in their journey. The air was fragrant with lavender, and the golden sunlight bathed the town in a serene glow. Henry, still grappling with the events of the previous day, decided to turn this stop into something unforgettable for Rebecca. As they stepped off the train, he turned to her with an intensity in his gaze softened by a warm smile. "Rebecca," he said, his voice steady yet tender, "today I want to give you something you never had, a piece of the childhood you missed." Rebecca's brows knitted in surprise, her lips curving into a hesitant smile. "Mr. Davenport, you don't have to. Your company is more than enough." "No," Henry interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. "You've already given me more than I can ever repay. You've reminded me what it means to feel alive. Now, let me do something for you." Hand in hand, Henry led her through the cobblestone streets, past charming cafes and vibrant markets, until they reached a boutique adorned with twinkling lights. The window display showcased exquisite dresses in every hue, each one a masterpiece of elegance and craftsmanship. "Today you deserve the best," Henry said, as a shop attendant welcomed them warmly. "Pick anything you like, something that makes you feel like the little girl ready for her first big celebration." Rebecca hesitated, her natural humility making her feel out of place among the opulence. But as her eyes landed on a simple yet stunning emerald green dress, she couldn't resist its understated beauty. It had a delicate neckline, and just a touch of lace, like something out of a dream. "This one," she whispered, almost afraid to touch it. Henry's face lit up with a smile. Perfect. Moments later, she emerged from the fitting room wearing the dress. It fit her flawlessly, the color enhancing the glow of her auburn hair and the sparkle in her eyes. Henry watched her, unable to hide his admiration. "You look breathtaking," he murmured. After purchasing the dress, Henry took Rebecca to a nearby artisan jewelry store renowned for its handcrafted designs. The jeweler presented several pieces, but Henry's gaze settled on a silver necklace with a delicate lavender charm and a tiny amethyst at its center. "This suits you perfectly," Henry said as he fastened the necklace around her neck. Rebecca's fingers grazed the charm, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Their day continued with a walk through the lush Santa Rosa gardens. The blooming flowers and ancient trees seemed to envelop them in peace. They strolled in companionable silence until Rebecca broke it, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "Henry," she began, "all of this, the dress, the necklace, the kindness, it's overwhelming for someone like me who's known only solitude. It's not the gifts themselves that move me, it's how you see me. You make me feel valued, like I matter." Henry stopped and turned to face her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Rebecca, you matter more than you know. In one day, you've shown me a depth of humanity I'd forgotten existed. You've given me hope." Rebecca smiled faintly, tears threatening to spill over. "Thank you, Henry, for everything." As the day wound down, they returned to the train station. Just before boarding, Henry pointed toward an antique carousel spinning under strings of fairy lights. "Have you ever ridden one of those?" he asked, his tone playful. Rebecca laughed softly. "Not since I was a little girl." "Well, today's the day," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the carousel. They climbed aboard, laughing like children as the ride began to spin, the lights and music blurring into a whirlwind of joy. As the train departed Santa Rosa, Henry couldn't take his eyes off Rebecca. Her new dress, the lavender necklace, and the soft smile on her face all made her radiate an inner light he found irresistible. She, in turn, felt a new sense of belonging, a feeling she hadn't dared hope for. The next stop on their journey was Carmel by the Sea, a quaint coastal town known for its breathtaking cliffs and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Henry planned a private dinner for Rebecca at a villa overlooking the ocean. Under the glow of candlelight, they shared stories and laughter, their connection deepening with every passing moment. As they sat together, the soft hum of the waves providing a soothing backdrop, Henry broke the silence. "Do you ever think," he began, "that our souls meet and part only to teach us something greater? That every encounter is a lesson disguised as coincidence?" Rebecca tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. "I believe our souls never truly part," she replied. "Every meeting leaves a mark. Perhaps the real miracle isn't the destiny that brings us together, but the choices we make once we're here." Henry smiled, her words resonating deeply within him. "You're extraordinary," he said. "Please call me Henry, just Henry." Rebecca nodded, her smile soft. "All right, Henry." The night sky over Carmel by the Sea was a blanket of stars, their glow mirrored in the quiet waves below. Rebecca, radiant in her new emerald dress, walked hand in hand with Henry along the shore. Each step felt like a moment suspended in time, a delicate balance between the past and an uncertain but hopeful future. As they returned to the station to reboard the Elysian Express, an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows. A tall man with broad shoulders and a tense expression stepped into their path. His piercing gaze was locked onto Rebecca, his face a mask of frustration and barely contained anger. "Rebecca," the man said, his deep voice slicing through the tranquil night. "Care to explain who this is?" Rebecca froze, the color draining from her face as recognition dawned. She tightened her grip on Henry's hand, drawing strength from his presence. "Luke," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "What are you doing here?" Luke's expression twisted with indignation. "What am I doing here? I could ask you the same thing. Running off with another man, pretending I don't exist?" His eyes flicked to Henry, his tone turning sharp. "And who exactly are you?" Henry's calm demeanor didn't waver as he stepped forward slightly, positioning himself protectively in front of Rebecca. "I'm Henry Davenport," he said evenly. "And you must be Luke, the man who failed to appreciate the incredible woman standing beside me." Luke's face darkened, his body tensing as though preparing for a fight. "This isn't your business," he snapped. "Rebecca is my wife." "Ex-wife," Rebecca corrected, her voice gaining strength. "We divorced a year ago, Luke. You have no claim on me anymore." Luke let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Divorced? That's a technicality. You're still my family, Rebecca. You always will be. Or have you forgotten that I was the only one who cared about you when you had no one?" Rebecca's eyes flashed with defiance, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You didn't care about me, Luke. You controlled me. You made me feel like I was nothing without you. I see that now." The tension between them crackled like static, the air thick with unspoken pain. Henry's voice broke the silence, firm but calm. "Luke," he began, meeting the man's fiery gaze. "Rebecca is not alone anymore. She has people who love and support her. Whatever power you thought you had over her is gone." Luke's jaw tightened, his bravado faltering for a moment. "You don't know anything about us," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less bitter. Henry took a step closer, his tone unwavering. "What I know is that you've lost her, and it's time for you to let her go." Luke took a shaky breath, his anger giving way to confusion. "What do you mean she's not alone?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Henry exchanged a glance with Rebecca, silently asking for her permission. When she nodded, he turned back to Luke. "Rebecca has a family now," Henry said simply. "She's not the woman you knew." Luke scoffed, his bravado returning. "What family?" "She grew up in foster care, for God's sake." "That may have been true once," Henry replied evenly. "But it's not anymore. Rebecca has a mother, a real one. She was adopted just this week by the same woman who adopted her twin sister, Elise." Luke's face registered shock, the weight of Henry's words visibly unsettling him. "Twin sister?" he repeated, incredulous. "What are you talking about?" Henry took a deep breath. "Elise was my wife. She passed away years ago, and until recently, none of us knew she had a twin. Rebecca has been reunited with her family, and she's finally getting the life she deserves." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'm not the same person you knew, Luke. I found a place where I belong, a family that loves me for who I am, not for what I can give them. It's time for you to move on." Luke opened his mouth to respond, but seemed at a loss for words. After a long moment, he took a step back, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly, his voice devoid of its earlier venom. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the night. The tension lingered in the air as Rebecca turned to Henry, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't believe that just happened," she murmured, her voice trembling. Henry took her hands in his touch grounding her. "You were incredible," he said softly. Standing up to him like that, it took so much courage. Rebecca smiled faintly, her heart still racing. "I couldn't have done it without you." Henry's expression shifted, a mixture of resolve and vulnerability crossing his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, holding it delicately in his hand. "Rebecca," he began, his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've reminded me what it means to hope, to dream, to love, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you'll never have to face anything alone again." Rebecca's breath caught as Henry knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, casting a soft glow over them as the moment hung suspended in time. "Rebecca Mills," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks as she gazed at the man before her, the man who had shown her kindness, love, and a sense of belonging she had never known. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Henry rose to his feet, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. The world around them seemed to fade away as they shared a kiss that spoke of promises and new beginnings. The Elysian Express moved steadily along the tracks, its rhythmic motion carrying Henry and Rebecca into the next chapter of their lives. As the train approached its final stop, Rebecca sat by the window of their shared suite, gazing out at the rolling countryside bathed in golden morning light. The diamond ring on her finger sparkled with every movement, a tangible reminder of the promise Henry had made the night before. Henry entered the suite carrying a tray of breakfast, fresh croissants, a bowl of ripe berries, and 2 steaming cups of coffee. He placed the tray on the small table by the window and leaned down to kiss Rebecca on the forehead. "Good morning, my beautiful fiancée," he said warmly. Rebecca blushed, the word still feeling surreal. "Good morning, Henry." They shared the meal in comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of a connection beyond words. When they finished, Henry took her hand in his expression thoughtful. "Rebecca," "I've been thinking," he began. "We've been through so much in such a short time. This journey has changed everything for both of us, but now it's time to start building a life together, and I want to make sure you know that I'll do everything in my power to make that life as wonderful as you deserve." Rebecca smiled, her eyes soft with emotion. "Henry, you've already given me more than I ever dreamed possible. A family, a sense of belonging, and now, a future. I don't need anything more than you." Henry tightened his grip on her hand. "I know you mean that," he said, "but there's one more thing I want to do before we settle into our new life." Rebecca tilted her head in curiosity. "What is it?" He smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." When the train pulled into its final destination, a small, picturesque town on the northern California coast, Henry and Rebecca disembarked hand in hand. Waiting for them on the platform was an older woman with an air of quiet dignity. Her silver hair was swept into a neat bun, and her blue eyes shone with warmth and wisdom. "Rebecca," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I've waited so long for this moment." Rebecca froze, her heart pounding, as recognition hit her. This was the woman Henry had told her about, the one who had adopted Elise and had now embraced Rebecca as her own. Without hesitation, Rebecca stepped forward and embraced her, tears streaming down her face. "Mother," she whispered, the word feeling foreign but wonderful on her lips. The older woman held her tightly, her own tears falling freely. "My sweet girl," she murmured, "you're home now." Henry watched the reunion with a lump in his throat, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. He had made it his mission to give Rebecca the family she had always deserved, and seeing her in her mother's arms made every effort worth it. Over the next few weeks, Henry and Rebecca began to weave their lives together. They divided their time between Henry's estate in Napa Valley and the home of Rebecca's new mother, where she was surrounded by warmth and love. Henry spared no effort in planning their wedding. He wanted it to be a celebration of not just their love, but also the journey that had brought them together. With Rebecca's approval, he chose the breathtaking vineyards of Napa Valley as the venue, where the rolling hills and endless rows of grapevines would serve as the perfect backdrop. On the day of the wedding, the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the gentle hum of a string quartet. Rebecca stood in a private room, her reflection staring back at her from an ornate full-length mirror. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of lace and silk, simple yet elegant, with a veil that cascaded like a waterfall down her back. As her mother entered the room, Rebecca turned, her face lighting up with a smile. "What do you think?" she asked, gesturing to her dress. Her mother placed a hand over her heart, her eyes misting with tears. "You look like an angel," she said softly. "Elise would be so proud of you." Rebecca's smile faltered, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I wish she were here," she whispered. Her mother stepped forward, taking her hands. "She is here, my darling. She's in your heart, and she's in the love you found with Henry. Today, we celebrate not just you and him, but also the bond that has brought us all together." Rebecca nodded, blinking back her tears. "Thank you, Mother." The ceremony took place at sunset, with the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Rebecca walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, her heart pounding with every step. When she reached Henry, his gaze locked onto hers, and the world seemed to fade away. The officiant's voice was calm and steady as he led them through their vows. When it was Rebecca's turn, she spoke with a voice filled with conviction and love. "Henry, from the moment you entered my life, you saw me, not just for who I was, but for who I could be. You gave me a family, a home, and a love I never thought I'd find. I promise to stand by your side, to love you with all my heart, and to cherish every moment we have together." Henry's voice trembled as he replied, "Rebecca, you've given me a second chance at life. You've shown me that love isn't bound by time or loss. It's infinite. I vow to honor you, to protect you, and to make every day we share as beautiful as this one." As they exchanged rings, the final rays of sunlight bathed them in a golden glow. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Henry pulled Rebecca into a kiss that spoke of devotion and eternity. The guests erupted in applause, their cheers carrying into the evening air, as Henry and Rebecca turned to face their new life together. The evening of their wedding unfolded like a dream. The reception was held outdoors, with long tables adorned with twinkling lights and arrangements of lavender and white roses. Guests dined on exquisite dishes crafted by the region's finest chefs, while glasses of napas, celebrated wines, flowed freely. The air was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warmth of shared joy. Rebecca and Henry took to the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The music, a soft waltz, seemed to wrap around them as they moved together in perfect harmony. Henry's hands rested protectively on Rebecca's waist, while her arms encircled his neck, their foreheads nearly touching. "You're radiant tonight," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible above the music. Rebecca smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I think it's the happiness," she replied. "I've never felt this whole before." Henry pulled her closer, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You've made my life complete, Rebecca. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my days showing you how much you mean to me." The guests watched the couple with a mixture of admiration and affection, their connection undeniable. As the song ended, Henry dipped Rebecca in a playful yet romantic flourish, earning a round of applause from the crowd. Later that evening, Henry led Rebecca away from the bustling reception to a quiet hill overlooking the vineyard. The stars above were brilliant, their light casting a soft glow over the landscape. They sat together on a blanket Henry had prepared, sharing a bottle of champagne and gazing at the endless sky. "This feels like a fairy tale," Rebecca murmured, leaning her head on Henry's shoulder. "It's just the beginning," Henry replied, his voice filled with promise. "We've both been through so much, Rebecca, but from now on, it's about building something beautiful together, something lasting." Rebecca turned to look at him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Do you ever think about Elise?" she asked gently. Henry nodded, his expression contemplative. "I do. She was such an important part of my life. Losing her felt like losing myself. But then I met you, and for the first time, I understood that love doesn't disappear. It transforms. I'll always honor her memory, but my heart is with you now." Rebecca reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Thank you for saying that. I feel like Elise brought us together somehow, as if she wanted us both to find happiness again." Henry kissed her hand, his gaze steady. "I believe that too, and I think she'd be happy knowing we've found each other." As the weeks turned into months, Henry and Rebecca settled into a life filled with purpose and joy. Henry continued his work as a hotel magnate, often involving Rebecca in his plans. She brought a fresh perspective to his endeavors, her insights helping to create more inclusive and welcoming spaces in his luxury establishments. Rebecca, for her part, pursued her own passions. She opened a small art gallery in Napa Valley, showcasing the work of local artists and hosting workshops for underprivileged youth. The gallery quickly became a beloved fixture in the community, a testament to Rebecca's generous spirit and creative soul. Their home, a sprawling estate surrounded by vineyards, became a sanctuary for both of them. They filled it with laughter, love, and the shared dream of making the world a little brighter. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Rebecca turned to Henry with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met on that train?" she asked. Henry smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Fate has a funny way of working things out. But if we hadn't met then, I believe we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are just inevitable. Rebecca leaned into him, her head resting on his chest. "I'm glad fate didn't make us wait too long," she said softly. Henry wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Me too, my love. Me too." As the first stars appeared in the sky, they sat in contented silence, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. Years later, their story became a cherished tale among their friends and family, a reminder of the power of love, resilience, and the mysterious ways the universe brings people together. Rebecca and Henry, now surrounded by children and grandchildren, continued to live their lives with the same passion and kindness that had defined their union from the start. Their love story wasn't just about romance, it was about finding hope in the darkest moments, embracing second chances, and building a legacy of love that would endure for generations. As they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the vineyard, Rebecca turned to Henry with a contented smile. "You know," she said, her voice warm with affection, "I think Elise was right. Some souls are meant to find each other, no matter what." Henry kissed her temple, his heart as full as it had been the day they said, "I do." "And I'm so grateful ours did," he replied. Under the glow of the setting sun, they held each other close, their love a testament to the beauty of life's unexpected journeys.